Learn English through ancient stories. The History of Australia. Chapter 1 Introduction.
Australia is the sixth largest country in the world. It is second only to Russia, Canada, China, the United States and Brazil, but the population is much smaller. The country is divided into 6 states and 2 special administrative regions: Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania, South Australia, Western Australia, the Northern Territory and the Australian Capital Territory. In Australia between 40,000 and 60,000 years ago, there were indigenous people who hunted and fished to support their huge and small tribal societies. There are 200 to 300 tribes scattered on Australia's highest peak. Each tribe has its own language and culture. During the 16th and 17th centuries, European navigators sailed to the Australian mainland from the Dutch to the British. At that time, Europeans called this place the southern continent, so the name Australia is a word extended from the southern and continental parts of Greece. In 1770, the famous person from British whose name is James Cook. He arrived on the east coast of Australia and named the place New South Wales. This is the origin of the state of New South Wales where Sydney is located today. In January 1788, the first British prisoner arrived in Sydney Cove, Australia. In the 80 years since then, the British successively escorted more than 600 prisoner ships to Australia, with a total number of more than 160,000. Many prisoners were later released from prison and came to Australia as free citizens. The only mutiny in Australian history took place in 1808, when the Governor-General offended many people. He was rebelled by his own soldiers and driven back to England, known as the Longmu Mutiny in history. In the 19th century, British colonies expanded across the continent. The colonies of Victoria, Queensland, South Australia, Western Australia, and Tasmania were established. The discovery of gold in New South Wales in 1851 and later in Victoria sparked significant population growth and economic prosperity. And then Chinese immigrants arrived during the gold rush and made notable contributions to the development of Australia. At that time, the Australian government imposed high taxes on miners, so in 1854, an armed conflict between miners and the government was triggered. 1901 was the most important year for Australia. The 6 British colonies in Australia federated to form the Commonwealth of Australia, becoming a self-governing nation within the British Empire. The Constitution of Australia was drafted, establishing a parliamentary democracy with a federal system of government. Following World War II, Australia experienced a wave of immigration from various countries, including displaced Europeans and migrants from Asia, significantly diversifying its population. Refers to the history of the indigenous and colonial peoples of the Australian continent during the 50-year period which preceded the foundation of the Commonwealth of Australia in 1901. Starting in the 1960s, there was a growing awareness and recognition of the mistreatment of Indigenous Australians and their dispossession of land.
Chapter 2 Population.
The Australian mainland covers an area of 7.69 million square kilometers. It is the largest island in the world and the smallest landmass in the world. It is about 3,700 kilometers long from north to south and 4,000 kilometers wide from east to west. Australia is also a country made up of people from many different backgrounds, with about 23% born in other countries and more than a quarter of the population having at least one parent who was born overseas. People from more than 140 countries choose to become Australian citizens. Cultural diversity has become a national identity of Australia and one of Australia's most important advantages in the face of the challenges of a rapidly changing world. As of 2000, Australia's population was estimated at 19 million, double the 1945 population. After World War II, Australia's average annual population growth rate was 2%, of which immigrants accounted for 40%, and the remaining 160% came from local birth. The situation of population growth varies from year to year. Especially in the early 1970s, the natural birth rate and the increase in immigration dropped sharply, thus affecting the overall population growth. The Australian way of life reflects the Western cultural origins of Australians. The lifestyles of people in Australia and Western Europe and North America have many similarities. In September 2021, the estimated population of Australia was around 25.7 million people.
Chapter 3 Modern Australia.
In 1972, Australia officially abolished the policy of only introducing white people. Australia has become a prosperous and multicultural nation, with a strong economy driven by industries such as mining, agriculture, manufacturing, and services. It is a member of the United Nations, Commonwealth of Nations and other international organizations. Contemporary issues in Australia include Indigenous rights, immigration policy, environmental conservation, and ongoing debates around identity and reconciliation. In 1972, the construction of the famous Sydney Opera House in Australia was completed. In 2000, Sydney, the largest city in Australia, hosted the Olympic Games for the second time. This modern diversity is nourished and integrated by Aboriginal culture, early European immigrants, and successive waves of immigrants from all over the world. It is the source of competitive advantage, cultural richness, and social stability. Now, Australia is known for its high standard of living, excellent healthcare system, and quality education. It is also recognized as a sporting nation, with a strong passion for sports like cricket, rugby, football, and swimming.
Chapter 4 The Flag of Australia.
The flag of Australia is known as the Australian national flag. It features a dark blue field. The flag was first flown in 1901, shortly after Australia became a federation. It was designed by Ivor Evans, a 14-year-old schoolboy, who won a public competition. The Australian national flag represents the unity and identity of the Australian nation. The Australian flag is the only national flag that flies over the entirety of Australia. The British flag on the upper corner of the flag represents her historical relationship with the United Kingdom. The seven-pointed star represents the 6 states and special regions of Australia, and several small stars form the Southern Cross constellation, which is a famous night sky view in the Southern Hemisphere.
Chapter 5 The Legend Story of Australia Story.
One of the most famous legends in Australian folklore is the Dreamtime, also known as the Dreaming. According to Aboriginal mythology, the Dreamtime refers to the time of creation when the ancestral beings, often referred to as the dreaming ancestors, shaped the land, animals, and humans. In the Dreamtime, it is believed that the world was a formless and featureless place. The ancestral beings traveled across the land, singing, dancing, and creating. They formed mountains, rivers, and lakes, populated the land with plants and animals, and gave life to the first humans. The Dreamtime stories vary among different Aboriginal groups across Australia, but they all share a common belief in the sacredness and interconnectedness of the land, animals, and people. These stories serve as a guide for moral and ethical behavior, provide explanations for natural phenomena, and pass on cultural knowledge from one generation to the next. One of the most well-known Dreamtime stories is the creation of Uluru, also known as Ayers Rock, located in the heart of Australia. According to the Anangu people, who are the traditional owners of the land where Uluru is located, The rock was created during the Dreamtime by ancestral beings known as the Mala or rufous-hair wallaby people. Legend has it that these ancestral beings traveled across the land, performing ceremonies and leaving their marks on the landscape. As they passed through the area, they sang and danced, leaving their footprints, handprints, and other markings on the rock. These markings are said to be visible on Uluru to this day, and they hold great spiritual significance for the Ananga people. Another well-known legend is the rainbow serpent. The rainbow serpent is a powerful ancestral being depicted as a snake or serpent that travels through the land, creating rivers, lakes, and waterholes. It is believed to be the source of life and fertility. According to the Dreamtime stories, the rainbow serpent created the rivers and waterways by digging deep channels with its powerful body. The winding paths of these waterways are said to represent the rainbow serpent's movements across the land. The rainbow serpent is also associated with the cycle of seasons and the renewal of life. These legends and stories are an integral part of Aboriginal culture and spirituality. They are passed down through oral tradition and are considered sacred knowledge. They provide a deep connection to the land, a sense of identity, and a spiritual understanding of the world. It's important to note that these legends and stories are part of the cultural heritage of Aboriginal peoples, and they hold different meanings and interpretations within different communities. Respect and sensitivity towards Aboriginal culture and traditions are essential when engaging with these stories.
Chapter 6 Introduction of Melbourne.
Melbourne is the second largest city in Australia. In 1835, European settlers led by John Batman and John Pascoe Fawner arrived in the area that would become Melbourne. They established settlements on the banks of the Yarra River, with Fawner founding a settlement known as Bearbrass and Batman establishing a rival settlement called Batmania. Eventually, the settlements merged to form the town of Melbourne in 1837. During the Victorian gold rush of the 1850s, Melbourne experienced a massive influx of immigrants from around the world, transforming it into a vibrant and multicultural city. The discovery of gold in nearby areas, such as Ballarat and Bendigo, brought wealth and prosperity to Melbourne, making it the financial and administrative centre of the colony of Victoria. In the late 19th century, Melbourne underwent significant urban development and cultural growth. It became known as the Garden City due to its beautiful parks and gardens, many of which still exist today. Landmarks such as the Royal Exhibition Building, built for the 1880 Melbourne International Exhibition, and the Flinders Street Station, an iconic railway station, were constructed during this time. Melbourne's prosperity continued into the 20th century. It became the temporary capital of Australia from 1901 to 1927 while Canberra was being built. The city hosted the 1956 Summer Olympics, which marked a significant milestone in its sporting history and showcased its ability to organize major international events. In addition to sports, Melbourne is renowned for its vibrant arts and cultural scene. It is often referred to as the cultural capital of Australia. The city is home to numerous art galleries, theatres, music venues, and festivals, including the Melbourne International Comedy Festival and the Melbourne International Film Festival. Melbourne is also known for its coffee culture, with numerous cafes and laneways offering a diverse range of coffee experiences. The city's culinary scene is celebrated for its multicultural influences, with a wide variety of cuisines available in its many restaurants and eateries. Today, Melbourne is a thriving cosmopolitan city with a population of over 5 million people. It is a center for business, education, and innovation, with a strong focus on technology and research. The city boasts modern architecture, including the distinctive Federation Square, and is home to major corporations, universities, and research institutions. Melbourne's vibrant atmosphere, cultural diversity, and quality of life make it a popular destination for tourists and residents alike. It continues to evolve and adapt, embracing new ideas while honoring its rich history and cultural heritage. The Melbourne story is an ongoing narrative, shaped by the people who call the city home and the countless stories of its past, present, and future.
Chapter 7: The Impact of Elizabeth II on Australia.
Queen Elizabeth II, the reigning monarch of the United Kingdom, has had a significant influence on Australia as the country's constitutional monarch. Here are some key aspects of her influence. Queen Elizabeth II is recognized as the formal head of state of Australia. However, her role is largely ceremonial and symbolic, with the Governor-General acting as her representative in the country. Queen's powers in Australia are mostly limited to her role as a constitutional monarch. She performs ceremonial duties, such as appointing the Governor-General, giving royal assent to legislation, and granting honours and awards. Queen Elizabeth II and other members of the British royal family have made numerous visits to Australia over the years. These visits are often highly anticipated and generate significant public interest and media coverage. It's worth noting that Australia is a constitutional monarchy with a parliamentary democracy, and the power to make and enforce laws resides with the elected government and the Australian Parliament. The Queen's influence is primarily symbolic and represents the historical and constitutional ties between Australia and the United Kingdom. With the Queen as sovereign. As a constitutional monarch, the Queen, by convention, is not involved in the day-to-day business of the Australian government, but she continues to play important ceremonial and symbolic roles. However, any future changes would likely be undertaken through a democratic and constitutional process. If Australia were to become a republic, it would signify a shift in the country's governance structure and the role of the monarchy, potentially leading to changes in ceremonial, symbolic, and constitutional aspects. Ultimately, the impact of Queen Elizabeth II on Australia's future will be determined by the choices made by Australians themselves, as they continue to shape their nation's political, social, and cultural identity.